So I was doing that to my wife. I was basically saying that you need to be like this kind of person for me to love you, instead of just accepting her for who she was.
Welcome to the Crucible Project podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Well, hello, everybody. Again, this is another Crucible Project podcast, and I'm your host today, James Damey. And it's amazing to me how we can connect in communities by simply telling our story. Our stories have an incredible way of drawing us together, of relating to each other. And today's story, I am excited for you to hear. I think it'll inspire and encourage you. And so I want to welcome Bill Snyder to today's podcast. Hey, Bill.
Hey, how you doing, James?
Doing great. I'm so glad that you decided to come on here and share your story with us. It's just it's something that I think God gave us that's special to share because your story is my story and my story is your story. Well, Bill, tell us a little bit about life before we hear some of the ways Crucible has been a benefit to you and in your journey. Tell us a little bit about life before Crucible.
Yeah, so my story starts. I became a Christian in high school, or in college, I'm sorry. And then
Hmm.
I immediately wanted to serve God. So with this inflated a sense of self-worth, I went into ministry, graduated from Trinity Divinity School, spent lots of time and money on everything from my library to all this hard work, and got involved in a really good church in the Chicagoland area.
Yeah.
And during that time, we had three little preschoolers, and my wife was home alone raising them while I was busy doing God's work.
Wow.
That was a horrible formula, a really horrible formula. And what
Mm.
happened was, rightfully so, she became upset with me for not helping more as a parent and as a husband.
Mm.
And I saw her as somebody who was like resistant to doing God's good work, you know?
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
what happened was I got involved with another woman at church who thought I was really cool, who
Mm.
thought that all of my
Mm.
effort and all of my religiosity, all of my godliness was a good thing, while my wife was thinking like, you're not home enough. And so
Wow.
it was a really bad chemistry in terms of my ego wanting something really badly that my wife wasn't in the space to be able to give me. And so my wounds
Mm.
really were horrible in terms of putting me in a place where, even though I knew I was doing something wrong, it wasn't
Yeah.
what God wanted, I was so selfish, I still wanted it.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I ended up getting involved with another woman. I told my wife about it after it seemed like it was going to be pretty soon that she'd figure it out. And
Mm.
so I was told through the denomination that I was ordained by that the next best path, now that I'm in this situation, is to leave quickly and quietly.
Wow.
It reminds me of back in the days when a woman would get pregnant out of wedlock and she'd be sent away, to hide that.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I left quickly and quietly with such a sense of sadness and
Mm.
regret and shame around that. And didn't tell anybody other than sending a resignation letter. So people at church are saying, can we give you a sabbatical? What can we do? What's the matter? And I'm going, nothing. I just got to go quickly.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was,
That's
it,
incredible.
it was horrible. So
Yeah.
that was way back in 1986.
Mm. Okay.
And so from 1986 until 2009, when I did my Crucible weekend, my relationship with my wife had some good days and a lot of bad days. There was time when, she forgave me, theologically, she forgave me. But I always had this sense that, like, I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't trustworthy, that I
Mm.
wasn't somebody who really was forgiven. And I carried this weight around, the shame
Mm.
of leaving ministry, the shame of
Man,
what I'd done, knowing that it was wrong. I mean, that there was no question about that. The morality was never a thing where I thought I deserved this or it should happen to me. I
sure.
knew I was wrong. So that I carried that, and fast forward for a long time there of this up and down and
Mm.
frustration, and we got to the point where there was a lot of anger. I had substituted some other things for ministry. I became an
Mm.
endurance athlete in the decade of my
Wow.
50s. And so
Mm.
I did an Ironman. I did lots of marathons and things like that. And so I was just substituting something else that I wanted for
Mm.
myself instead of my wife. And
Yeah.
not seeing that, and I can see it now in hindsight, obviously, but not seeing it then. Here I'm thinking like I'm doing something I want for myself. Why are you always getting in the way? Why are you always trying to block what I want? And so I was angry, really angry at her. I was angry at God. Like, how come I married this person? Why did I marry somebody like some of the other people I see where the wives let the guys go off golfing all the time or do other fun
Yeah.
things, you know? And I was angry at myself because I knew ultimately there was a part that I was playing in this, and in terms of screwing up my relationship with my wife and not
Mm-hmm.
being in a place that was healthy. So anyhow, that brings me to 2009 November when I did my
Yeah.
initial weekend. And by the
Oh,
way,
okay.
for
Before you get into that, Bill, so tell me, what was that point when you're like, I need something, I need help, or what was that for you?
Yeah, well, I was getting there because I went to the church where John Casey and many other Crucible brothers were at, and I had been
Okay.
asked probably 5 times, to go on a week.
Uh-huh.
And part of it was this sense of ego where it's like, well, I don't really need that.
Yeah.
That was one of the responses. The other one
Hmm.
was that ultimately I didn't like being like everybody else. There was a part of me that likes being different and
Yeah.
special. That's what the air
Hmm.
quotes.
Yes.
And so I just thought I'm not going to do this just because everybody else is doing it. Well, finally, that's what it took. It was the sense of anger, frustration, and things getting worse and worse at home.
Wow.
And so I just thought, oh, so help me, I need something. And so that's
Okay.
what that's
Yeah.
what brought me to my initial weekend.
Wow. Oh, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. And so what was, I mean, you're having this struggle, this what you've built your life up to was pretty much ripped out from under you, no healing or restoration even offered, it sounds like. And so you kept trying to replace that kind of a purpose in your life with different things. But you're replacing it with these different things, trying these different things, and then you finally give in after people have been telling you about going to Crucible with friends and brothers from your church. What was the impact of that weekend? And if there's something specific you want to talk about, what you brought out of the weekend, that's great. We'd love to hear that too. But the overall impact, let us know those things.
So yeah, the impact was huge. And so let me start by saying that I went with a lot of anger, which I already mentioned. And it was funny because each of the parts of the weekend that help a man just show up with what he brought gave me lots of opportunities to show up with lots of anger.
Mm,
But being a good Christian guy, a guy who had gone to seminary, a guy who was a former pastor, I never showed that anger. I learned how to stuff it.
right.
And it did leak out once or twice in a few embarrassing moments. And by the way, as a hypothetical, um, I asked, I've used on the weekend an illustration about my anger in one of the teach pieces. And I went back and asked my adult daughter, I said, do you ever remember this happening? Because
Mm,
it was so
wow.
humiliating for me,
Mm-hmm.
that story.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, no, I don't remember that. And I said, oh, thank the Lord.
That's called grace. That's
Yeah.
mercy.
So,
That's
so
good.
on the weekend, yeah, what happened was I thought for sure, and I knew by this time that I played a big part in the mess that I'd created. I
Mm,
could see that. I still was in this blame game mode though, because I still believed it was mostly my wife's fault. I had this tiny part. She had the
mm,
majority of the part.
Wow.
And
Uh-huh.
so I went in with a lot of blame, thinking, okay, my work on this weekend is to figure out how to uh, get my wife to the point where she's not like this anymore or something. It was more around our relationship. Well, as it
Yeah.
turned out, and this is, I think, common for a lot of us on Crucible weekends, is that what we think we're going to work on and what we end up working on turns out to be a little bit different, tangentially
Mm.
related, but different. And so in my case, I ended up dealing with the shame that I had felt and carried for so many years. And so that was a pivotal moment. And I would absolutely say that the sense of grace and forgiveness and restoration that I got on the weekend was almost tantamount to when I became a believer in college. And
Wow.
so uh, I would, I still say it's the second best moment of my life, um,
Wow.
if I don't count marriage.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a powerful statement, man.
Yeah.
Um, and so you came out of this weekend with a handle a little bit more on this anger that you were experiencing, that the people around you were experiencing. And I think in the church, one of the things we hear is anger is bad or anger is a sin. What would you say to that?
Well, I would tell you that my anger, the way I felt it and expressed it, was I wasn't dealing with it. Let's just put it that way. I was
Mm, okay.
stuffing it in terminology that we're probably familiar with,
Yeah.
um, and so that I this is a funny side story that really fueled a lot of my endurance sports energy.
Wow.
I could spend 4 hours running on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and I had lots of energy. I had lots of
Wow.
motivation. I would come home feeling much better, and where I could ride for 12 hours on my bicycle and feel like, okay, now
Wow.
that was a
Yeah.
good workout.
Hmm.
After my
Hmm.
weekend in 2009, I started losing motivation to do all that stuff because there wasn't anger to fuel it. Isn't that
Wow.
interesting?
Yeah. So that's kind of a caution. Be prepared.
Yeah, there is an impact. There is an impact.
Yeah. That's
And
incredible.
so my journey, that was the start. And we often say in Crucible jargon that the first weekend is like peeling back the layer of the onion, the first layer.
Mm, hmm.
And so on my initial weekend, I went with a couple other guys from my church, and we all said we heard about this 2-year program, and we said we're in. And at the final weekend meal,
Hmm.
we looked at each other and said, "We're in. We're doing the 2-year program, no matter what. We're in." And
Wow.
so that was in November. They used to start sequentially in January. So in
Mm,
January, I started on my 2-year program with Crucible. Let me just say, when I got home from my weekend, I kind of backtrack a tad here. When I got home
uh-huh.
from my weekend, I told my wife, "Hey, look, I have blown it. I'm so sorry. I want to work on our relationship." She said, "Well, that's great, but it's too little too late. I've been wanting to do this for a
Mm,
long time. You have been rebuffing
wow.
me. And so sorry, we're not, I don't care, you know?" And so I
Wow.
asked, well, honey, if you don't want to work on a relationship, why are we even still married? And she said, well, two reasons. One, it's cheaper. Two, it's easier at the holidays. That was my starting point. I had hurt her
Man.
so badly. She was like, sorry, I just can't engage. No matter what,
Wow.
it's not going to be enough. And so my 2-year program mission was to re-engage with my wife.
Mm,
And it was interesting. It went through a lot of stages. The first stage was I worked really hard to do the right thing.
mm,
And later on, she acknowledged that, and she said, "Well, it feels like you're doing the right thing, but it feels like you're doing it because you have to, like I'm a project." And I thought, the truth is, that's true. I do feel like I don't feel like I love you more. I just feel like I'm trying to do the right thing so you'll love me more.
wow. Yeah.
And
Man.
so that was sort of phase one. Phase two was realizing that, I needed to do more, but I wasn't quite sure what. It was, getting support from friends and in my 2-year group and living in that community and being supported by them to
Mm,
keep on being the kind of man that I believed my wife wanted. And then
mm,
finally, it was after my 2-year program, truthfully. What happened was I realized that I was loving my wife in a very conditional way.
Wow.
The same wound I had, which was an unconditional love wound, where I keep trying harder, I keep trying harder, I keep trying harder. I was basically doing the same thing to her, where it's
Mm.
like, well, honey, if you would do this, I would love you more. If you were only like this, I would love you more. And the truth is, I could tell she didn't feel accepted for who she was. That I was laying something on her that I had never intended, but that's how it was coming across.
Wow.
So when I realized that, that was, I think, the big turning point, where I could just accept her for who she was and love her for who she was. And then there's been a lot of growth on my part because there were some things where I thought, well, I would still like it if she was a little bit more like this. In
Mm.
accepting the fact that maybe she wasn't wired to be like that.
Wow. Yeah.
We can all probably relate to the fact that if you're a parent and you have kids, if you've got an athletic kid, but the kid's not musical, and you
Yeah.
beat the heck out of them to make them a musician, they're not going to have fun doing it, right? They won't be good at
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And vice versa. So I was doing that to my wife. I was basically
Mm.
saying that you need to be like this kind of person for me to love you instead of just accepting her for who she was. And not trying to make her fit in my box for what I wanted,
Right.
but just let her blossom for who she was. That became pivotal for us. And so
Yeah.
that unconditional acceptance, the same thing I felt on my weekend and have come to accept and enjoy, I've been giving to her. And I can tell you right now that our lives together are the best they've ever been. Um,
Wow. That's
we've
awesome.
reconnected post trauma, sort of,
Right.
and
Right.
and love each other with that, in spite of it, on top of it. So it's
Yeah.
just, I am really super humbly grateful to God and to Crucible for everything I've learned about myself, how I've learned about who my wife is, to
Yeah.
appreciate her. So a little tidbit: she's a magician and I'm sovereign. So for Crucible terminology, what that means is I'm a person who is very optimistic, idealistic. I see the good in things. That's sort of the character of a sovereign. A magician is a person who's very critical. She sees things that can go wrong, and
Mm.
she can see that. She looks ahead and can be alerting me to say, hey, if we keep doing this, it won't be a good outcome.
Yeah.
And she's critical. That's just part of her nature, how she's wired. So I would work really hard to do something to please her, and then she'd say, well, you painted the whole room, but I see this little spot you missed. And instead of
Mm.
being happy about that, she'd see the part that wasn't exactly right. And
Sure. Yeah.
and so I would get so angry at stuff like that instead of being
Hmm.
able to appreciate the fact that she could see what I didn't see.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so where that's helped us is in retirement. In my
Mm.
40s, I thought, it'll be okay. And she goes, no, honey, it may not be okay unless we plan better.
Oh,
And I
wow.
and I said, no, it'll be fine. And she goes, no,
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable with that. And so
Hmm.
we wouldn't be happily retired if it wasn't for my wife's ability to see into the future, what things need to be looked at and addressed, and so on. So right now, I have learned, I've got two or three other good friends, Chris Cleghorn and Scott Selby and my wife, who are great
Mm.
magicians, who I
Mm.
trust a ton. And often I say, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? I consult them because I'm not inclined to look ahead. I'm inclined to just enjoy what's present and say, oh, this sounds like a good thing. Let's do it.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, and I overcommit easily, and that's where they can help sort of say, "Wow, aren't you already doing enough?" You know.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that's important. I think so. For those of you listening, what Bill's talking about is one of the things we do is we have this pendant that we all wear. That's the Jerusalem cross. So it's a large cross in the middle that represents Jesus Christ, and then four smaller crosses around that represent the values that we find are important for us to find balance in our lives that Jesus represented. So the King, which is the sovereign that you were talking about, Bill, and then the sage, which is the magician or the teacher, and then the lover quadrant, which is how we show other people love and receive love. And then the last one is the warrior. So the one we step into in order to get things done in our lives and to uh, use our anger in a healthy way. And yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So these are the parts that we know, all four of them together, well rounded. And I love what you said, Bill, about being able to accept that maybe my quadrant of one of these is low, and I can rely on somebody who has a strong quadrant there, like a sage or a sovereign or a king, or queen, and be able to be more complete by relying on that together. I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's something that I know I'm still learning in my life. But you came back, and this just leads straight into leaning on brothers and sisters too together in Christ. And so you started this 2-year program after your initial weekend. Why was that important in helping you restore your marriage and learn more about yourself, being in that community of Crucible men?
Well, I think, first of all, the openness that's a part of any Crucible community immediately kind of alleviates the sense of, well, I got to look right or say the right things. And so everybody in that group knew right away, both why I had to come on a Crucible weekend and the work that I had to face the future for myself and to grow restore the relationship. And so these guys were praying with me. They were supporting me. They were, as I did my work, they were encouraging me. And sometimes they would commiserate with me and say, "Holy cow,
Mm,
you're in a really hard place." And
hmm.
they would bless me for wanting to continue to do the right thing. And there were
Wow.
plenty of times when I felt like, am I doing the right thing? Or
Mm,
is doing the right thing worth it? Will I get the outcome I wanted? And that's a selfish question, but I was still wondering if that would happen. And
mm,
in just being in a community of men who could continue to help me get what I wanted for myself in that way, and
yeah.
also believe that was God honoring, was a good thing. And let me just say that as soon as our 2-year group was done, because some of us were a part of the same church that went through the 2-year program together, we back in those days, Crucible Project was called Dare to Soar, and so
Mm,
we started a post 2-year group of guys who had gone through it together and were on leadership track and so on, and we nicknamed it Double Dare to Soar.
wow.
So
I
so
like that.
yeah, DDS. So our Double Dare to Soar group still continues. I'm still a part of that
Mm,
group.
wow.
So
How many years has that been?
I started in 2010 in my 2-year program, finished at the end of 11. So it's 2012. So it's been 11 years that I've been
Wow.
continuing to do
That's
my
amazing.
work
Yeah.
with men that who went through the original weekend with me, my initial weekend. And
Mm,
yeah, I love them a lot. I serve with them a lot. We still staff together. We meet on Friday nights at several of the guys' homes and switch it around. And so, yeah,
wow.
that community is indispensable. And it's not just indispensable for me to get something for myself, but as I've grown and as I've matured, I know I'm giving back to those guys as well.
Yeah.
We joked, we've thought that what's going to happen is we'll all someday be old dudes sitting in our rocking chairs on the front porch of some retirement center and calling each other's BS on each other, like, that's not true. I know that you
I love
know.
that.
So anyhow, yeah, I mean, our goal is to continue to just do life together the rest of our lives, and
Mm,
to have that kind of impact in each other's life, to support each other. And now it's not so much on marriage restoration. There were a couple other
mm,
guys who were in a hard place when they went through their weekend, and have come out on the other side of that. So now it's like supporting when we have issues with our adult kids or grandkids
yeah.
or or health of our spouses or ourselves, things like that. It's just life, doing life
Yeah.
together.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, Bill, some of the things that you've accomplished is you're a large part of the leadership from Chicago, and you have graduated from the 2-year program. You're a retreat leader and a leader for our elder program. So you've done a lot with Crucible. You've got some amazing accomplishments here. What have you been able to develop through that 2-year program as you stepped into these different roles in your life?
I would say that by engaging, for me personally, my growth has been I first started serving. I was a kitchen coordinator on like probably my third weekend. Um, so
Mm.
leading there and serving there has been something that helped me learn both leadership and taking responsibility. I remember like a small thing, but it's a big thing. I'm the kind of person who, because of my woundedness, if I get in trouble from a time crunch or challenge or
Hmm.
something, I'm more inclined to just suck it up and double the effort, double down
Right.
on myself, work harder,
Yeah.
and instead of asking for help because somehow
Yeah.
that feels weak or I'm not enough or whatever. And I remember like probably the second time in the kitchen, um, I had come up with this wonderful meal that I was going to prep, and I thought I had prepped enough time or allowed enough time. I didn't have enough time. Somebody
Mm.
just happened to walk by and said, "Hey, do you need any help?" I mean, out of the clear blue. I mean, this
Wow.
was
Yeah.
definitely a God thing. And I said, absolutely. And they came in and bailed me out. And then I realized after the fact, why didn't I just ask for help? What is it about me? So I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about how to grow as a person and as a leader. So, bottom line is that in every circle I've been a part of, whether it's been the regional community, whether it's been the retreat leader community,
Mm.
I have learned how to be a better leader because I've learned both about myself, my own shadow and my goal, the good and the
Yeah.
bad. And
Hmm.
I've been a better student of that for other people.
Mm.
So I remember the last several years in my professional career in IT, I got promoted quickly and had some high level roles as a global person in my company. And I used every Crucible sort of growth strategy and coping mechanism and everything I'd ever
Mm.
learned for my team, for my peers, for the people above me. That was invaluable in terms of all of the skills I learned to be able to translate them into a better outcome for my life, not just with my
Mm.
relationship with my wife, but with
Yeah.
my kids and professionally and everything. So
Yeah. Wow.
lots of gratitude there.
Absolutely.
So you were asking about elder role too.
Yeah.
You were
Uh-huh.
going to shift into that. So I retired a couple years ago, and a person that helped spur me on was Chris Cleghorn because he was a couple years ahead of the curve with me on this, and he's an avid
Hmm.
reader, and he pointed me in the direction of Richard Rohr. And so I've been reading some of his work. He's a Catholic Franciscan, so somebody like me who comes from a very evangelical background would go, "What good could that guy offer?" You know. And as it
Mm.
turns out, what I've learned is that he talks about sort of this sense of two halves of life, and there are other people who write about that concept too, where in the first half of life you're building, you're working hard, you're establishing who you are as a person, um,
Yeah.
sort of polishing your gifts and abilities, so on. But then in the second half of life, it's more about not building anymore, but starting to let go of those things and offer them freely
Mm. Yes.
to
Hmm.
instead of define what's right and wrong, you open the funnel a little bit to become more accepting of people regardless of the label they have. um,
Wow.
and you realize that there's a lot of Jesus's life who was very accepting of people even if they were sinners or
Yeah.
religious or whatever. And
Hmm.
so it's been fun for me to take that energy and cultivate the role of elder within Crucible community. For those who are part of Crucible community, we always have had elders on initial weekends, but our intent is to not only help that role grow and be even more effective than it has been, but we're looking to cultivate a community of older men that have godly lives and a sense of wisdom that other younger men would want to come up alongside and say, "Can you talk to me a little bit about how you handled this or that?"
Yeah.
One of the truths is that old guys are not necessarily smarter; they're just older.
What? I've never heard that before. That's a
and,
great deal.
and so we're trying to be elder guys that are older and a little bit
Yeah.
wiser. And so we're working at continuing to do our own work and within Crucible Soul Work, and we're working to create a community of men who, in this stage of our lives, are very intentional about engaging and purposeful about giving and coaching and mentoring younger men
Yeah.
and helping them prepare to get to the same stage we're at with a full bucket instead of feeling like they just crossed the finish line and they've got an empty bucket. Now, what's the next step in their life?
Wow, I love that. And I want to personally thank you for stepping into that importance of bringing that role to kind of a bigger platform in what we do with Crucible. I think that is so important. And so thank you. Thank you for being instrumental in that. One of the things that I've heard a lot about recently, and as far as personal development, is creating a personal mission statement. Do you have one of those, a personal mission statement?
Yeah. So thanks for asking. And it's morphed.
Mm,
It's not unusual for us who have mission statements in Crucible to continue to kind of tweak them, think about them, see if they're relevant. In
hmm
mine, I'll tell you my previous one that happened just recently through some of my elder work. It's morphed. So here's my original one that I've had for probably the last 5 or 6 years. I make the world a better place as I engage and coach and create connection, opportunity, and hope.
Wow.
So that in my building career and early on, that was kind of what I was focused at doing. So now my new mission, and this reflects my eldership, sort of, and is my mission is to love well.
Wow. That is a lot simpler. That's simplified, that's for sure.
And it encompasses everything. In all of our mission statements in Crucible are intended to be um, not reflective of a job or a
hmm
circumstance in life, but they transcend all of that. And so when you think about loving well, where is there a place where that doesn't
Mm,
make the world a better place?
absolutely. Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, with my neighbors, with my church friends, with my wife, my kids, grandkids. If I love well, I bring out the very best in them all the time. I make
Yeah.
their lives filled with joy, and I support them in hard times. Whatever it
Yeah.
looks like, loving well is what Jesus did, and I love that. So
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
my
wow.
mission today.
I love that. Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story through your church hurt, through your marriage struggles, and even developing all these different steps. It's easy to think that we'll never get to a certain place of health or restoration in life, and it's just so encouraging to hear that kind of inspiring story that from somebody who's already walked that path. So thank you for taking the time today and letting us hear your story.
You bet. Thank you, James.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening to this podcast today. We have a lot more podcasts that you can take a look at, and we hope that you were encouraged and inspired by today's podcast. Remember, this is a journey, and we get to walk it together. Have a great day.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you're listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.